Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Relaford, and this will be my oral presentation on child neglect and substance abuse. Please excuse all the excess room, but I did want you all to see everything I have in my presentation. All right, let's get into it. So, first off, a lot of people they ask the question, child neglect, they associate it with child abuse, but a lot of people don't really know what is the difference. However, these terms can be used interchangeable because child neglect is child abuse. Although it may not be physical, any type of physical bruising on the children, it is still neglect because they may be treated. They may not be able to receive the proper care that they need, whether it's doctor's visits, dentist visits, just may not have enough to eat in the home. So although a lot of people associate child abuse with being physical, it's definitely mental, emotional, sexual, just different things along the nature of the nature. So I did want to go ahead and establish that child neglect is child abuse. Here are a couple of definitions that I'm going to use throughout my presentation. So child abuse is defined by CAPTA, which we'll get into a little bit later on during my presentation, as any act or negligence to act by a child's guardian that results in physical or any type of psychological harm. That includes sexual abuse, negligence, which I just talked about a few moments ago, or any type of maltreatment that places the child in harm's way. And like I said, we'll talk about CAPTA a little bit later on during my presentation. Substance abuse, which I will talk about as well, will be the dependency or overindulgence of alcohol or any type of legal or illegal drug for mood altering purposes. And substance use disorder will be that reoccurring use of the substance. So alcohol, legal and illegal drugs, if they are reoccurring and taken in excess amounts, and definitely lead to significant impairment, that will be considered substance use disorder. All right. So here are some national statistics that I wanted to provide to you all so we can put it a little bit more in perspective. So 8.7 million, which turns out to be one in every 8 children ages 17 or younger, they at least reside with one parent that has engaged in any type of substance abuse disorder throughout the years of 2016 and 2017. Now, while 1 in every 8 children reside with at least one parent with SUD, which will stand for substance use disorder. 1 in every 10 children, which is 7.5 million, same age range, will reside with at least one parent with an alcohol abuse disorder throughout the years of 2016 and 2017. And 2.1 million, or 1 in every 35 children ages 17 or younger, will reside with at least one parent with an illicit drug use disorder. So these are just some national statistics that kind of help us put it in perspective how many children were affected throughout the years of 2016 and 2017. Now, also, some risk factors. Why do we care? Why does it matter? So, in regards to the substance abuse and child negligence, substance abuse could increase the likelihood of children experiencing abuse and neglect. So, like I stated a little bit earlier, when a parent is under the influence of any type of substance, they are not able to think logically. Their reaction times are slow. So just imagine a child getting into any type of threatening situation, they're unable to intervene. So that increases the likelihood of experiencing abuse or neglect. Even abuse on the other end, the child may become subject to the parent because they are angry. They may be stressed out. So that can lead more to the physical abuse that we discussed earlier. As a result, if abused as a child, the child's chances of experiencing substance related problems as an adult are increased as well. And, just think about it like this. You see your parents doing something you may know is wrong, but you think it's okay. Or, if that you won't get caught or get in trouble because you see your parents doing it. So just the effect of the child learning through observational learning, just them being in that environment and seeing what happens when these substances are used, it can either deter them away from using, or it can definitely increase the chances of them using as well later on in life. Those who are of a lower economic status are more significantly impacted. Like we've been talking about that a couple of weeks now in our class, just the stress of not having enough money, just, with stress being a significant influential factor, it definitely impacts the chances of children experiencing abuse in a household. Okay, so the history of child neglect in the United States. I found this to be rather interesting because I wanted to know, hey, what was the first case of child abuse? And while, this unfortunately may have been going on since the beginning of time, the awareness didn't come to the forefront until the case of Mary Ellen Wilson was introduced in 1874. Prior to that, children, just like wives, they were thought of as the husband's property. So you wouldn't necessarily intervene on a family, or you just didn't think, or the people of that time, they didn't necessarily consider children being abused. So in the case of Mary Ellen Wilson, unfortunately, both of her parents died. She was placed in the care of another family, and they were being abusive, physically, emotionally, excuse me, in multiple ways. So it wasn't until the neighbor was able to witness these signs of abuse that they were able to intervene. And excuse me, during them intervening, this brought, like I said, national attention. So in 1874, the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which was the world's, which is crazy, first child protective agency, was formed. And I find it rather interesting, just a little fun fact in case you did not know, it was already something established for the protection of children. So the attorneys of the case had to refer to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in place. And, they brought along the question, like, how are we protecting the animals, but we're not even protecting the children of this country? So I find that to be a very interesting fact. And later on, it wasn't until 1962. So you see that tremendous gap in years that child abuse was determined to be medically diagnosable. So between that time, it may have been a lot of abuse going on, but I also find it interesting that 1962 wasn't that long ago at all. So excuse me, I don't know what's going on today. So following these events, in between these times, mandated reporting laws began to take over, and those are, of course, just laws that require certain people of certain professions to actively report to those appropriate authorities what is going on, the things that they see, especially when you think a child is in harm's way. So even though mandated reporting laws were established, there was no uniform definition of child abuse. So this led to many false arrests, many false prosecutions, and even those on the other end not even investigating the case because there was no uniform definition of what child abuse was. So this led to a lot of, just false accusations, as well as accusations that were never investigated. So that goes on to establish CAPTA. So CAPTA stands for the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. And this came up, like I said, I talked about it in the first slide. It's a federal legislation that addresses child abuse and neglect. And it also provided that much needed universal definition of what child neglect was, as well as what child abuse was. So this was like really the first time that it had been addressed in legislation that, child abuse and child neglect, it was a thing. So not only did it provide these definitions, but it also provided federal funding So this CAPTA is served as a guide because it allowed, like I said, provide the uniform definitions of child abuse and neglect, but each state had that authority to create their own laws and own acts regarding child abuse. So it was very important to have CAPTA in place, at least so we could have a uniform system of at least, that top bracket explaining what child abuse and neglect was. So that's one thing that I really want to highlight because it was very significant, and also it allowed government intervention in what the state may have going on. Even if the state chose not to address it at all, it did still provide government intervention to the significant cases. Also, during the 1990s, CAPTA was what's the word I'm looking for? Was amended several times by amendments that just kind of added on to it. Several acts and several amendments were established in reference into adoption, homelessness among youth aging out of care, of course, abuse, as well as how to get treatment for not only the children that are experiencing these conditions, but also the parents. So some more child neglect laws and policies. These were two that I really wanted to highlight. Was the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act of 2016. Once again, only 3 years ago. It required each state to protect the well-being of infants that were significantly affected by drug abuse at birth. So for a lot of women, this looked as if their children being removed at birth. I currently have a case in which I manage as a CASA volunteer where my child was removed at birth and she pretty much has not been home in the past 2 years. But, that's what that looked like for a lot of women once that substance use was present at birth. Another one was the Substance Use Disorder Prevention that promotes opioid recovery and treatment for patients, and the Support for Patients and Communities Act. Now, this provided state agencies, any type of social services, as well as abuse treatment agencies and hospital staff, medical staff, all to kind of intervene and implement safety plans to help those children at risk. So like I said earlier, the CAPTA, as well as its various amendments, they allowed for government intervention. And I believe that was just, kind of a smart thing, being that each state had their own laws. Like I said, while laws vary by state, it is presumed that a parent cannot function effectively supervising their child while they are under the influence, especially if they are taking the drugs in excess. So therefore, that leaves children at a higher risk for maltreatment as well as neglect because they are unable to watch over the children appropriately and cannot intervene when they are at risk. So a lot of times the children are made to fend for themselves. So some significant findings I found within the literature. It was 4 findings, and some of them we discussed, but some of them were my first time hearing about them. So the first one is that youth whose parents abuse substances are more likely to experience neglect and abuse across the board, so physically, sexually, and emotionally, than those who reside in non-abusive households, which we've talked about multiple times throughout the week and that I've explained earlier throughout my presentation. Therefore, they are more likely to enter the foster care system. Another one is that youth within households of substance abuse and caretakers are more likely, is exactly twice as likely, to engage in those addictive behaviors themselves. So, like I said earlier as well, they see it, they may not know it's okay, they may know that it's not okay, but it is something that they ultimately engage in down the lines. I've even come across some literature that talked about children using these drugs as well. So, just as life goes on, they may come into contact with these drugs, and they are unfortunately twice as likely to become addicted to them as well. Excuse me. Now, parents diagnosed with substance use disorders require both treatment not only for themselves but also treatment for